Elizabeth Warren made it official this week. She's running for a third term in the U.S. Senate and giving herself an extremely ambitious to-do list if she gets it.
There's a lot more we've got to do. Pass a wealth tax, make child care affordable, protect our coastal communities, and build a 21st century transportation system across all of Massachusetts. Oh, and like I've been saying for years, the middle class, put stricter rules on banks so they don't crash and hurt working people.
Of course, to get that third term, Warren also has to make it through the 2024 election. And based on some recent polling, a fair number of Massachusetts voters might not be as excited about her prospective re-election as she is. Case in point, a Mass Inc. polling group survey from late January and early February. It found that just 41% of Massachusetts residents viewed Warren favorably compared to 36% who viewed her unfavorably. And when it came to running again, the numbers were similar. 43% said she should and 36% said she shouldn't. So how tough a climb does Warren actually face, and could it include a challenge from inside her own party? Joining me to talk it through are Joan Vennochi, an associate editor and columnist at the Boston Globe and a member of the paper's editorial board, and Jesse Mermell, the president and founder of DeWitt Impact Group and a former Democratic congressional candidate. Thank you both for being here. Joan, did Elizabeth Warren's announcement come as a surprise for you, or did it confirm something that you'd expected for a while?
I don't think it was a surprise. I mean, there were some rumors and speculation that she might not run, but I'm pretty sure they were planted by people connected to people who want to be the next senator from Massachusetts. I think she chose a really good time to make the announcement. You know, she's got a bank collapse behind her, and now she's got Donald Trump to prosecute.
I hadn't, this shows how much more connected you are than me. I had not caught those rumors that were maybe being planted saying she wasn't going to run again. Had you been hearing those, Jesse?
Yeah, certainly had heard plenty of rumors that she was considering multiple different paths. But listen, if you want to understand what someone's thinking, maybe just listen to what they're saying. She's been saying consistently over and over and over again, I'm running for re-election. And lo and behold, she's running for re-election.
What do you make of the timing? Joan said, you know, she's got the bank collapse behind her, winded her sails in terms of policy. Do you have a similar read?
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. Obviously, it feels a little bit early. Normally, you might see something after the summer, but she's got a big agenda. She knows she has work to do, and she wants, I think, to squash those rumors of folks saying, oh, maybe she's not going to run again, or folks who might be thinking of challenging her. She wants to get out there. She wants to start raising money. She wants to be touching people all across the Commonwealth. I think it makes good sense, and I think the reaction to her announcement was incredibly positive.
And I think it was really interesting that Ayanna Pressley and Michelle Wu, who are both mentioned as potential Senate candidates at one point, are in that endorsement announcement. So that puts that to rest.
I noticed that too. And also in the endorsement announcement was Ed Markey, who, in addition to being a pretty good political communicator, I found his presence a reminder of the primary challenge that he beat back from Joe Kennedy a couple years ago.
And I thought it also positioned them really as a team, right?
Yeah,
Just presenting, we are your U.S. senators and we are working for you as a team in D.C. That's what it felt like to me.
Joan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say he also represents longevity.
Yep, good point. I want to ask about those polling numbers that I've referenced and trying to, you know, bring the usual media negativity at the start of the segment. But when you mentioned that these rumors talked about various pathways that Warren might be considering, what were some of these alternate options that people were convincing about?
Well, certainly as people consider whether or not President Biden is running for re-election, you know, might she consider another presidential bid? There's inevitably going to be turnover in the cabinet. She was certainly talked about as a potential cabinet member at the beginning of the Biden term. Would there be a role for her there? That type of thing. Nothing terribly radical, Adam. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there was also sort of the thought or the talk that she might have a successor in mind, and that she would do something to sort of pass the torch to the person that she would prefer. I mean, I've heard, like everyone, that it could be Ayanna Pressley, but for sure, I mean, she's running again. Congresswoman Presley's in her announcement, so that was just typical political talk.
Okay, let's go back to the Mass Inc. poll that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. It found that Warren was weaker, relatively speaking, with less educated voters, with voters who live further away from Boston, and also with young voters. I saw the first two things coming, I think, but the third piece surprised me, maybe because I think of young voters as having been so key for Ed Markey when he beat Joe Kennedy, despite Joe Kennedy's relative youth, again, a couple years ago, and beat him very handily. why might younger voters not have fully made up their mind about Elizabeth Warren yet?
I don't know. I found that piece surprising as well. It seemed like there'd be a natural connection. I think as she gets out there and tells her story, particularly around fighting for canceling student debt, she's been a national leader on that, not just a Massachusetts leader, that she'll find great support there. On that poll, I think it's important to note the numbers that you showed are about regardless of party. If you look at her numbers in the Democratic Party, where, let's be honest, it's Massachusetts, that's where the race is likely going to be, her numbers are very, very strong. So I think it paints a slightly different picture about what her vulnerability may or may not be.
That's a good point.
Could I throw out something
Absolutely,
on the age
yeah.
thing and Ed Markey? I think he pulled off a miracle that maybe only a man could pull off. He's now 76. He's been in Washington forever. He put on a pair of sneakers and got endorsed by AOC, and he was good to go with the kids. I'm not sure that any female politician of that vintage would get the same reaction.
That's a really interesting point to chew on. To your point about numbers that augur a little more positively for her, there was a poll conducted, I think, for Northwind Strategies by Change Research a little bit after the Mass Inc. poll, and it found similar splits in terms of favorable, unfavorable, but it also found that more of the people polled, I can't remember if it was voters or residents, felt very favorably about Warren than any other politician in the state, including Charlie Baker, which was striking because she's maybe divisive when it comes to the entire state, but the people who like her really, really, really like her.
And when you're heading into an election, or re-election in particular, you want to see that, right? You want to know that your folks aren't just going to go check the right box, but they're going to give you $25. They're going to go stand at the polling place. They're going to knock doors. They're going to talk to her friends. And there's no question that Elizabeth Warren has that incredibly strong, enthusiastic, and practiced base. That is a base of people who are used to working. They haven't been sitting around gathering dust, right? They know what they're doing, and they'll get to work for her.
So we've talked about the possibility of a primary challenge and how this announcement may be, among other things, an effort to keep one at bay. Do either of you think that she is going to end up getting a challenge, either from someone in the congressional delegation or maybe some other young, ambitious, maybe not so young, ambitious Democrat who decides to take a crack at her running from the right?
You want to go first?
Well, I believe she already has a third-party challenger. If I'm correct, someone
You're
announced
right. A libertarian
a few weeks ago.
challenger, I believe, whose name I should have front of mind.
I know. I apologize to them that I don't know their name. Listen, it wouldn't surprise me if someone from some party and some part of the spectrum in Massachusetts emerges.
But how about the Democratic Party?
I don't think she'll have at least a serious, credible contender in the Democratic
Joan,
Party.
do you agree?
Well, I think Jake Auchincloss has a bit of a lean and hungry look, but he says he's not going.
He says he's not doing it,
and I take him at his word. But you know what? I say if he wants to do it, he should. I mean, we now have seen, incumbents being challenged, whether it was Michael Capuano by Ayanna Pressley, Seth Moulton did it with John Tierney, Joe Kennedy tried it against Ed Markey, it didn't work. But, nobody owns their seat forever.
Another interesting point to ponder, I want to mention, our producer was kind enough to fill in my ignorance. It is Louis Marino.
Louis Marino,
who's running, who's already said that he's going to take on Elizabeth Warren. I want to ask you, before we wrap up, we've only got about a minute and a half left, what about the possibility of a solid Republican challenger? Amy Carnevale, the new chair of the Mass GOP, told me that she knows of at least 2 Republicans who are considering a run, that she's confident the party will be able to field a credible challenger. Last time Elizabeth Warren sought re-election, she ran against Jeff Deal, had similar poll numbers, and kind of wiped the floor with Deal. Is there anyone in the GOP, and Jesse, we'll start with you, then you get the last word, Joan, anyone in the GOP who you think could make her sweat?
Listen, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't sweat Scott Brown, and he wound up in the U.S. Senate and upending some really important votes. So I think we'd be fools in my party to sleep on anybody in the GOP right now, but they've got a tough road ahead. Obviously, they're coming off of a disastrous election in 2022. They're trying to sort of reconstitute their party and pick it up off of a deathbed. I think it would be really, really tough for the GOP to put up a credible candidate, but we cannot assume that's the case, and Elizabeth Warren has to be, and our party has to be ready and assuming there'll be a credible candidate.
Joan, sorry, I stopped on.
No,
say
you're
that.
fine.
Say that last sentence again.
No, we have to be ready and assume that there's a credible candidate. I think that's tough for them to pull off, but we need to be ready.
You talked about intel that you were getting at the outside of the segment. Are you getting any intel on Republicans who might be doing this?
No, but to speak to that point, I guess it depends on the definition of credible. And I just don't really see, someone who could take her on. the most popular Republican in Massachusetts is Charlie Baker, and his own party despises him. And I just don't see Democrats embracing him. So I would say, yes, Scott Brown should be remembered. Democrats shouldn't forget that that happened, but it's tough to see someone who could beat Elizabeth Warren.
I have no intel on this, but the only name that really comes to mind would be Karen Polito.
That's the one that I had in mind too, and I also
I'm
have
certainly
no
not
intel.
sitting here encouraging that. But
No, but that's a name to watch, I think.
Yeah.
All right, Jesse Mermell, Joan Vennochi, thank you both.
Thanks, Adam.